I've decided to start on a new sequin project, and so to do this I have started in the way that I usually do with any of my embroidery projects, which is by transferring the design onto the fabric using the traditional method of prick and pounce. For those of you who are new to the channel and perhaps don't know what prick and pounce is, it's an embroidery design transfer method whereby the pounce, which is a fine powder, is rubbed through the holes of the design onto a draft created by pricking. For pricking, I use a fine needle that is loaded into a tambour handle. And if you follow me on Instagram, you may recognise this piece, which I am actually working on against a canvas, because my original idea was to do this straight onto the canvas, and therefore I just pricked the design straight through printout and onto the canvas to avoid doing the pounce transfer at all, and I just follow the pricked holes. However, when I colour blocked in the canvas, I actually really liked what I was left with, and so I've kept that canvas just as a rough painting. And I've decided that I'm going to try this same design but onto fabric using proper prick and pounce and not skip any of the usual processes and try and do it in sequins as was the original plan to go onto the canvas. All that being said and those decisions having been made, I'm now ready to pounce the draft onto the fabric. So I'm just going to pin the draft onto the fabric in the centre where I think it's going to be best placed. I'm able to feel all of the pounce holes through the draft, which you can't actually see because obviously they're pretty tiny, but I can assure you they are there. In this jar I have my pounce, and as this is a dark fabric, I'm going to be using a white pounce which is made up of very finely ground chalk. I'm using my rubber, which is just a rolled up piece of felt, to transfer the pounce onto the draft and rub it into place to allow it to only drop through the parts of the draft that have the holes pricked in them. This is going to take a bit of time to work my way around the draft and to feel all the holes and check that everywhere is sufficiently transferred to be able to see the design when we remove the printout. These sequin pieces get quite pricey, and I have a bit of a personality tendency to try and make do with what I have around me, which is really quite lucky for a crafty person because it is so easy to spend loads and loads of money on craft supplies and to not even be mad about it, to be honest, but it can run away with you a little bit. So in the vein of this fabric is in fact left over from my toiling allocation at uni. So it's a little bit of an odd shape. As you can see, it's lost a corner in the top right hand side. And it has a slightly glittery effect to it. So I'm going to be using the wrong side of the fabric, which is more of this flat olivey colour. I'm pretty happy with the amount of pounce that has transferred onto the fabric, and I've got a nice sort of outside edge for where the design should finish. So now it's time to come in with a gel pen. I'm going to be using a silver gel pen because of the dark coloured fabric. That should show up pretty well on the fabric. And I'm just going to draw in the lines of the pounce that I can see. The pounce will fall out of the fabric with touching it and tensioning the fabric and all those sorts of things. So the drawing in with the pen will give me a more permanent guide to follow now that I've been able to take the design from the printout. Also, in my sort of make-do attitude, I will be using a slightly wrong type of frame for this today. Back also when I was in uni, I bought myself a tapestry frame, like you might do cross-stitch on, because I knew I needed a large frame for embroidering onto, and I couldn't quite afford a slate frame, which is what this sort of work should actually be done on, which would give the best tension possible for this sort of work. But I knew roughly what I was aiming for, and I felt that I could achieve something close with a tapestry frame. So that's what I purchased, because it would give me a large area to work on. The problem with these is that they only have tensioning bars on the top and bottom, and they are round so that you can roll your design onto itself. However, I of course am not going to be doing that kind of work on this frame, and so I am working out ways to sort of adapt it to make it work for the kind of thing I want to do on it. So this means that I also want to tension the sides of the fabric, because they would usually be left open, and I'll be doing that with ribbon and webbing to strap it to the vertical sides of the frame. But also I need to control the roll of the upper and lower rollers, as they do tend to turn in on themselves whilst you're working and reduce the tension on your fabric. I'm happy with my design on the fabric, so it's time to frame up in my aforementioned tapestry frame. To do this, what we need to do is to start by pinning the top and the bottom onto the rollers, which have these fabric tabs for us to attach onto. Starting in the center so that we can even out the tension on either side. We're trying not to pull the fabric too tight. We don't want to overstretch it, but we do want to smooth it out so that it is as even as is possible to get the best sort of tension we can out of this fabric. I like to do this with pins the whole way across first, and then come back in and sew it into place for more security. I also like to use very long glass-headed pins for this. They're nice and strong so that if you want to, you can double dip your pins. It also gives you enough length to be able to bend them back up and get a good hold with your pins whilst you're still just sort of working out the placement of your fabric. As you can see by how much it moves, it's not the most expensive frame in the world, and the sort of ability to move it at the sides isn't ideal. As I mentioned earlier, a slate frame would be much better for this sort of thing. So if you have one of those, please do use it. But if you do have one of those, you're probably not going to be watching this video. Once the top is in, we need to go back in and do the same to the bottom. Again, I'm going to start by popping one into the center to give us a point to work out from, and then we can sort of try and match to the top rollers. We want to make sure that all of the grains of the fabric are being pulled evenly and smoothly straight down. We don't want to be pulling it left or right and skewing the grain of the fabric at all at this point. I'm coming in now with a threaded up needle. I've chosen one of my favourite threads, which is a very stable cotton thread. It's a little bit thicker than your regular thread, so it should be good for holding everything into place. When sewing through the tabs of the frame and the fabric, you want to make sure that you're coming up straight through both layers so that you're not skewing the tension of the fabric as you come through it. The needle should be angled so that it is exactly perpendicular to the plane of the fabric. At the end, you can pull tight and securely knot off, and then cut away your thread to do exactly the same for the bottom. Once again, I had a route through my supplies to see what I could use to tension the sides of the piece, as that's going to be our next step, and found myself a reasonably long length of non-stretch ribbon, which I thought would be great. However, it did turn out not to be quite enough, but that's what I'm going to start with today. So face the ribbon in towards your embroidery and double dip your pins starting at the top so that you can pull across and around the frame. Then come back up to the surface of the fabric and grab another pin and pin that one into place. At this point, you don't want to be pulling your fabric too tightly. It should be flat, but it shouldn't be taut at this point because we want to create some tension, but we don't want to pull everything over to one side as we start to tension this one side. We want it to be balanced when we put in the other side. So keep going round the frame and then back up, bringing the ribbon to the front and pinning into place. This uses a remarkable amount of ribbon or webbing, whatever you're using. So if you, like me, didn't quite have enough, do bring some more in. Again, face the piece in towards the embroidery with the body of the ribbon. Take it around the edge, pull it back in front, and double dip your pins into place. By double dipping, I just mean where you bring the pin down through the fabric, back up to the surface, and then back down through the fabric again and up to the surface. Just allows for a little less twisting within the fabric in that area, but also makes good use of the full length of a long pin. When I found that I had run out of ribbon, I also had some heavy calico, which I was able to cut up into strips of about an inch wide. Now this is something you can do if you don't have any webbing or non-stretch ribbon to hand, and can provide a really good alternative. It can be used in exactly the same way, or you could sew the pieces together, perhaps on a sewing machine just with a running stitch so that you have a longer piece to work with. You must of course finish each side with your obligatory tap of the fabric to feel how the tension is coming and if it is firming up from where you were before, which is all we're looking for at this stage. Over to the other side, we need to do the same thing as before. You will notice that I am working on one side of my frame, as my frame is so much larger than the piece that I want to embroider. This is a little bit of an experiment to see if that really affects the tension of the piece where it is sort of strapped over to one side of the frame, which in theory it shouldn't, but also so that it allows me to bring at least one arm round the sides to the embroidered piece. If I framed it up absolutely in the center of my frame, then I wouldn't be able to use side access for either side of the piece. So it gives me a little bit of assistance on that left side if I choose to use it once I've started embroidering. With the tapestry frame, you will see that I do have to work around the wing nut connection of the frame to the stand, which is a little bit annoying and does mean that you have an area that sort of pulls up and down away from the piece slightly, which, as I mentioned earlier, if we were working on a slate frame, we wouldn't have these sort of problems. But if we go back and around, now we are working on the second side of the piece. We're trying to ease the fabric across to create that even tension with the tension we created on the right hand side with the strapping, and therefore to pull the embroidered piece, or the piece to be embroidered, into a nice smooth even tension across all of the warp and weft of the fabric. Tuck or pin any loose ends you might have from your webbing or ribbon or strapping of any description, just out of your way so it's not going to bother you whilst you're working. And also make sure you don't have any pins that are sticking up and are going to scratch you once you've started working, because they will get you. You will automatically start working and not think about where the pins are placed and scratch yourself horribly. I always do it to myself, so I warn you now, tuck all those ends in of the pins and try and look after your precious hands. That may be all the strapping that you need to add for your particular frame, but as you can see with mine, I do have a roll bar at the top and the bottom so that you could, if you were doing a tapestry, roll it up so that you could access a different part of the design. However, for what I'm doing, I'm going to add an extra strap that goes around the back of the two rollers to help to counter tension the fabric that we have just tensioned, which as I work on it and press against the fabric whilst I am pushing the needle through the fabric each time, I'll be turning those rollers in towards themselves a little bit, and my vertical tension will be decreased ever so slightly every time. And as that builds up over the hundreds of stitches I intend on making into this piece, it will reduce the amount of tension that I have to work with. So I'm hoping that by adding a strap around the back that's going to pull in the opposite direction, that should help to counter this. That is us ready to stitch. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a like below, as it really helps others to find it. And if you'd like to see what this piece becomes, then think about subscribing to the channel. It really helps me out and lets me know what you like best. There will be more videos to follow on the progress of this piece. I'm not going to say exactly when they're going to be out because honestly, I don't know. I'm just going to enjoy the process and take my time with it. So I'll see you in the next one when it's ready.